This conference will now be recorded.
And then we will start. All right, so a little bit of a quick sort of recap, I guess, on the feasts. This slide shows that in Israel's calendar there were 7 key feasts within the nation. Most of them revolve around the beginning and the end of their agricultural year. So last week I think Phil did the Day of Atonement. Well, I know Phil did the Day of Atonement because I'm listening to the Day of Atonement. And now we've come to the climax, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. There's an enormous amount of information on the Feast of Tabernacles. It's kind of way too much information to try to digest in a class. So I'm kind of trying to pick the essence, I suppose, the core things which we might want to consider. When you look at the agricultural calendar of the nation of Israel, it all begins at that time in Passover. But as I said, it revolves around their agricultural year. It revolves around their 2 main forms of food production. So in the beginning of their agricultural year, it was all their cereal crops, the wheat and the barley. And so most of the beginning of the first 3 festivals, or 4, should I say, actually, the first 4 of the Jews' feasts all revolve around the harvest festivals of the cereal and grain crops. But of course, cereal's no good without fruit, because you've got to have fruit on your cereal. And so the second part of Israel's calendar year is all their summer fruits. So that's what the second part of the last 3 great feasts revolve around. They revolve around the second part of their agricultural year. So the whole calendar was really built on this, which is interesting because there's also quite a powerful type in this. If you think about cereal crops, it's that which comes out of the ground to provide a source of food. If you think about fruit, it's coming down from the trees that's provided. So there is, if you like, almost like a celestial and a terrestrial aspect of the cereal crops versus the first fruits. And this is really where we've been looking at the second part, which is everything starts in the 7th month, which of course was known as the month Tishrei. It was called something else in the Old Testament, which we will look at briefly. But it's during this 7th month, which all starts with the blowing of the trumpets. It's calling everybody to prepare for the Day of Atonement, calling the nation to get ready for the festivals of the 7th month, and it all starts with, a call to worship, a call to prayer, a call to solemnity, a call to acknowledge the holiness of this 7th month cycle. And of course, Phil dealt with the Day of Atonement. This is kind of like that, but right in the middle, which was symbolic of like the judgment seat. This is the place where everybody afflicted themselves. They came together. It's the time when once a year the high priest goes into the most holy place. And he acts on behalf of the nation. He prays for the nation. And you've also got this incredible thing. And this is actually something interesting that Andrew brought up to me last week when talking about Romans chapter 9. This unusual story about these 2 goats, which were deliberately chosen to be alike. That's what it says in the Day of Atonement. They were to be like the same. But one was destined for death and one was destined for life. And the selection process was by lottery. So bad luck for the goat that drew the short straw. So by lot, you had this thing where you had these two goats which were the same. What made them different? And we were talking about Romans chapter 9 with Jacob and Esau. You know, God chose Jacob in the womb before they were even born, before they had any, action that could qualify them. God chose Jacob over Esau. And Romans chapter 9 is, well, that's God's prerogative to do that. He's the potter, we're the clay. But this story with the two goats is a very similar type of story. In fact, interesting, the Jewish rabbis, the Talmud, believe one is, of the two goats, they call one the Esau goat and one the Jacob goat. So one is the chosen and one is the rejected. So that's the way they do it. So I just thought I'd throw that out there for Andrew. Just an interesting perspective on the Day of Atonement. So that's enough of the preamble. After the Day of Atonement, there was 5 days which led to the Feast of Tabernacles. And the Feast of Tabernacles was this incredible Bible school, amazing Bible school, because it was camping, sometimes glamping, because they could make booths anywhere. So obviously it's the festival of booths, and this festival was quite unique. It was very much a time when all the families get involved, and it's a time obviously which is still pretty cool today. So, whoops, have we lost my speaker? Oh, might have to bring that back on later. So some of the significant events where the Feast of Tabernacles actually appears in the Bible. There's references, of course, in the Old Testament in Leviticus chapter 23, Numbers chapter 26, significant places where the Feast of Tabernacles is mentioned and instructions of what they were to do during the Feast of Tabernacles. But one of the most amazing ones is in the story of 1 Kings chapter 8. So we'll read some of that. There's 66 verses. We won't read 66 verses. It's going to be a bit much of 1 Kings chapter 8, but maybe starting with David, we'll be reading a few sections of scripture. So 1 Kings chapter 8, 1 and 2, if you read those first 2 verses.
Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the chief of the fathers of the children of Israel, unto King Solomon in Jerusalem, that they might bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of the city of David, which is Zion. And all the men of Israel assembled themselves unto King Solomon at the feast in the month Ethanim, the feast, which is the 7th month.
So here's the one occasion in the Bible where it's called something else. The month is called the month Ethanim, which is really interesting. It's the only time this is used, but obviously this is the same month as the month Tishrei. And the feast being referred to is the Feast of Tabernacles. We'll look at that in a second. It's really interesting why it's called Ethanim. So Ethanim has this idea of perennial springs. The perennial springs of Zion out of Jerusalem was fed that water source from the Gihon spring, came into the pool of Siloam, and that was the water source of the city. And intimately connected with the Feast of Tabernacles is the life source of water that went into the city of Jerusalem. And it comes up over and over again. So much so that the name of the month was actually called in Kings, this name which has the idea of perennial springs. So maybe verse 65 and 66, Jenny, just to get the end of this. Well, there's not that many verses in 1 Kings chapter. So what am I looking at?
Yes, there is. It's from 66.
Oh, yeah, okay. So I'll go back to 1 Kings from 2 Kings, and I'll find... Right, I'm with you now.
So Solomon observed the festival at that time, and all Israel with him, a vast assembly of people from Lebo Hamath to the Wadi of Egypt, They celebrated it before the Lord our God for 7 days and 7 days more, 14 days in all. On the following day, he sent the people away. They blessed the king and then went home, joyful and glad in heart for all the good things the Lord had done for his servant David and his people Israel.
So it's one of the occasions at the dedication of the temple that obviously they celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles, and it's one of the few occasions where something else amazing happened on that day. What happened on that day?
Dedication of the temple.
Dedication of the temple was amazing. The glory of the Lord came and filled the temple. I'm just trying to see where that verse is, but the glory of the Lord came down and filled the temple, which hadn't been seen in Israel. So maybe that's not in that record, but I'm sure someone might be able to find it. And Solomon offered this unbelievable abundance of sacrifices. So verse 62, verse 64, you'll see he's got 22,000 oxen, 120,000 sheep are all dedicated for offerings during the dedication of the temple. So, Solomon kind of definitely goes overboard whenever he does something. It's big. Just
Verse 10 and 11.
Verse 10 and 11. Thank you, Andrew. So going back to verse 10 and 11 of the same chapter. Lord filled the house. So that's an amazing time during the Feast of Tabernacles, which is interesting that the glory of the Lord comes down and is seen at that time. We'll come back to that with that reference. Just store that in your mind. So one of the next occurrences, where are we up to? Karis. Ezra chapter 3. Maybe you could read verses 1 and 2 of Ezra chapter 3.
When the seventh month came and the Israelites had settled in their towns, the people assembled as one man in Jerusalem. When Joshua, son of Jozadak, and his fellow priests, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and his associates began to build the altar of the God of Israel to sacrifice burnt offerings on it, in accordance with what is written in the law of Moses, the man of God.
And verse 3 and 4, Robert?
Despite their fear of the peoples around them, they built the altar on its foundation and sacrificed burnt offerings on it to the Lord, both morning and evening sacrifices. Then, in accordance with what is written, they celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles with the required number of burnt offerings prescribed for each day.
So here's something really interesting. So again, we've got the specific reference to the Feast of Tabernacles, but now it's at the dedication of the second temple under the building of Ezra and Nehemiah, or Ezra and Zerubbabel and Joshua, and they've got the brazen altar, and they've set up the brazen altar, and they've set it up, and lo and behold, it's the Feast of Tabernacles. So they're all celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, and in this case, it says they sacrificed the prescribed number of sacrifices according as it is written. And that's very different to Solomon, who sacrificed 22,000 bullocks and 120,000 sheep. It actually makes reference that on this occasion, they actually offered exactly what was prescribed in the law. Now, I think there's real significance in that, and we'll come back and look at that again as we go on. So, another amazing occasion at a dedication. So, moving on to Nehemiah chapter 8, where there is another
That is not the dedication of the temple, it's the dedication of that altar.
brazen altar, correct.
Yeah.
Because the temple wasn't quite finished. So, but it's at the time when they are in the process of trying to rebuild the temple and get it ready. But they set up the brazen altar, and when they've done that, they get pretty happy and celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. So, moving on. The next occasion is Nehemiah chapter 8. This is a great chapter. I was thinking we might read a bit of it, because there's a lot of detail on the Feast of Tabernacles here. So I think let's start. It's a bit of a weird place to start, but let's start from verse 8, and we'll read 2 verses each till the end of the chapter. Following on.
Verse 8, they read from the book of the law of God, making it clear and giving the meaning so that the people understood what was being read. Then Nehemiah the governor, Ezra the priest, and teacher of the law, the Levites who were instructing the people, said to them all, "This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep, for all the people have been weeping and said, listen to the words of the Lord."
Then he said to them, "Go your way, eat the fat, drink the sweet, and send portions to those for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy to our Lord. Do not sorrow, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." So the Levites quieted all the people, saying, "Be still, for the day is holy. Do not be grieved."
And all the people went their way to eat and to drink, and to send portions and to make great mirth, because they had understood the words that were declared unto them. And on the second day we gathered together the chief of the fathers of all the people, the priests and the Levites, unto Ezra the scribe, even to understand the words of the Lord.
And they found written in the law which the Lord had commanded by Moses, that children of Israel should dwell in booths in the feast of the 7th month, and that they should publish and proclaim in all their cities and in Jerusalem, saying, "Go forth into the mount, and fetch olive branches, and pine branches, and myrtle branches, and palm branches, and branches of fig trees, to make booths, as it is written."
So the people went forth and brought them, and made themselves booths, everyone upon the roof of his house, and in their courts, in the courts of the house of God, in the streets of the water gate, in the streets of the gate of Ephraim. And all the congregation of them that came again out of the captivity made booths, sat under the booths, for since the days of Joshua the son of Nun, unto the day had not the children of Israel done so, and there was very great gladness.
Sorry.
Day after day, from the first day to the last, Ezra read from the book of the law of God. They celebrated the festival of 7 days, and on the 8th day, in accordance with the regulation, there was an assembly.
So that's just an amazing chapter, because it shows that now it's almost like, because Ezra was at the other one, remember? Ezra was part of the last time they did this, when they dedicated the brazen altar, but it's now like Ezra's at this one, which is much later on, and it's like he's keeping it to the letter. So much so that they're quite specific about the branches, how to construct the booths, exactly what they're going to do each day. So this was a time where the Feast of Tabernacles was, probably in Israel's time. This institution of the Feast of Tabernacles carried on from this time and became a major traditional event every year from this time of Nehemiah. It was huge. It was almost like the real institution of the Feast of Tabernacles. So that's kind of pictures. They built them on their own houses. They built them in the courtyard of the temple. And obviously they just got fully involved. And this was all at the dedication now of the walls, the completion of the walls. So you can see the dedication of the temple, the dedication of the brazen altar, the dedication of the walls. And you can see each time the Feast of Tabernacles is being kept, it's around the dedication of the temple. Pretty amazing, I think. So the different palms or species, the Jews believe those 4 species that they have represent their wilderness wanderings. the different places, the willow branches where they were down by the sea, the palm branches where they were by the desert, the myrtle branches, the green leafy trees, and I forget what the other one was, but they suggest that they are the product of the hadar trees, or the etrog, or the citron tree. So that's a weird looking lemon. I don't know, has anyone eaten the etrog before? No? Very common in Israel, but it's like a citrus tree. So they had fruit trees, palm trees, myrtle trees, willow trees, 4 different species, which for them represented the wilderness wanderings. But it was all in accordance. God was very specific on what to go and get and how to construct your booth. And Nehemiah has this verse, which I think is just the most incredible verse. It's that one that the joy of the Lord is your strength. And it's that one, incredible feast where you're not allowed to be sad. Stop being sad. Stop crying. Stop mourning. Be happy. How do you switch on to that? How do you come into that? And I think it's really appropriate because we are here and a lot have been through a process of mourning and sadness. And so this has had a bit of reflection on me on what this actually means. And I'll come to that. But I think it's really interesting. What is this? What is this joy that happens at the Feast of Tabernacles? And that's what we're going to focus on. So there was lots of reasons they could be happy, obviously. They could be happy because summer. It's the end of summer. It's coming on into autumn. We look forward to getting to summer like we like the spring, getting away from the cold. They actually like the end of summer because it's so hot. They actually like the fact that the seasons are changing and getting cooler again. So it's moving on in those autumn months, but it's also that time where they get all the best fruits and they enjoy the best fruits. And obviously it was a time when they had this holiday together. So there was a lot of reasons they could be joyous. This was a few years ago. This was a pretty joyous occasion in our backyard at home. So this is our teams. Some of you were there, making up our booths. We had 2 teams competing with each other. So they denuded all our trees in our backyard. Barry brought along these giant bamboo things for construction, which was handy, and we made booths and had a wonderful celebration out there at our place. So that was a really joyous time, and it kind of depicts what the Feast of Tabernacles is all about. There's another, of course, amazing thing in regards to the Feast of Tabernacles, which we'll do quickly. We'll just look at. There is a lot of evidence. We can't actually say conclusively, but there's so much circumstantial evidence to show that it's actually when Jesus was born. That Jesus was actually born on the Feast of Tabernacles. There's so many hints through the Bible. This one here is very interesting. Of course, this is the lovely little picture of Jesus in a manger. So that's an interesting picture of how Jesus came into the world, that he was born in a place which was an animal shelter. There was no room in the house. Literally, it means no room in the house. So he had to go to the garage. Well, more so, to where the animals were kept, and that's where he was born. Who knows where the first time Sukkot, booth, or shelter might be in the Bible? Any guesses where it first appears? Back, earlier than Leviticus.
Genesis.
That's pretty early. We'll go with Genesis. And let's have a look at Genesis chapter 33. There's something absolutely I don't know. This to me, this is going to get your head scratching. This to me is there's an amazing irony that comes out in this section. First thing I want you to notice in Genesis 33, this is Jacob's rescue from Esau. So think about that story of the Day of Atonement and the two goats. This is Jacob's great escape from his brother because God has caused him to escape. And he leaves Esau in verse 16. Who are we up to? Let's read from verse 15 to 17 of Genesis 33.
And Esau said, "Let me now leave with the son of the folk that are with me." And he said, "What needeth it? Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord." So Esau returned that day on his way from Josea. And Jacob returned to Succoth and built him a house and made booths for his cattle. Therefore the name of the place is called Succoth.
Now, have you ever noticed that before?
Good question, Mark. Why does it talk about it?
What does Jacob build?
Tabernacle.
Look closer. What does Jacob build?
Shelter for his livestock.
And
Place for himself.
what does he build for himself? A house. Did Abraham dwell in a house? Did Isaac dwell in a house? In fact, there's a real emphasis, isn't it, in Hebrews? They dwelt in tents. They did not dwell in houses because they were strangers and pilgrims. Jacob gets to this place and he builds himself. In fact, when Lot separated from Abraham, it makes a great point that Lot went down and made himself a house. So Lot dwelt in a house, Abraham dwelt in a tent. Lot dwelt in the city. This is the first instance of one of the patriarchs making a conscious decision to build a house and calling it Succoth, the place. It's like, building yourself an absolute mansion in Remuera and naming it after your garage or after a shack. It's kind of strange. I find this really unusual that Jacob should call, and he makes booths or shelters for his animals. So there's Jacob's house and there's booth outside for his animals.
And it talks about him splitting his tent as well.
Yes.
I'm like, how come?
But it's not the word. It's not the word when it uses a house. It's not the same word for a tent. It's a different word. So it's like he made like some permanent structure or something a lot more permanent. Now, why this is interesting is because this, I believe, is one of the keys to the story of what Tabernacles was all about. Why they had to go and make booths. So the record says they made booths to remember their dwelling while God led them through the wilderness. And they were to be happy about that, really happy. So you think about going through the wilderness, through a desert, and every day, and you've got this festival to remember your wandering through the wilderness. And it's a great occasion. It's like, well, actually, that doesn't make me very happy thinking about that. It's like thinking about the bad times. But you see, the point, I believe, that's happening here is the booth commemorated not where they dwelt, but where God dwelt. Because where did God dwell with them? In a tent. God made his tabernacle with man and walked with them for 40 years in their midst. That's why they were to be happy. It's because God revealed himself and dwelt in a booth with them. That's why they were to be happy. That's the joy. Through all the tough circumstances of life, no matter how bad they are, you can be happy by knowing, or joyous, I should say, because there's a different word. There's a difference between happy and joyous in the Bible, quite different. The word happy is this word which is often used. Blessed is the man that has such and such, such and such. He's blessed because he has lots of children. He's blessed because he has certain things. In fact, one rabbi once said, you can never measure a man's true happiness until he's dead. Because happiness is a state of being, a state of life. Whereas joy is very much in the moment. Very much in the moment. And joy can be completely irrelevant to a lot of the external difficulties and pressures we might be facing. You can experience joy in some of the most difficult moments. And you'll see that when you go through the New Testament. We'll look at a couple. So, back to the fact of that it's the birth of Jesus. I don't know whether we want to go through this, but this is kind of the real, I suppose, hard evidence for the birth of Jesus. And it calculates from the time Zechariah went into the temple, as in Zechariah and Elizabeth, the father of John the Baptist. You can count exactly when he worshipped or when he offered in the temple, because the record says, it tells us he was of the course of Abiah. He was of the 8th course. And in Chronicles, it talks about all the different courses the priest served, and you know exactly when Zechariah would have been ministering. Why is that important? To calculating when Jesus was born? It's because you know after he went and ministered, he of course went back home to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth conceived. So you know after the finish of his course and of his period of his time serving, that's the time when Elizabeth conceived. So we know when John the Baptist was born, and guess what? It was Passover. So we know that according to the 8th course of Abiah, Elizabeth would have conceived in June, and John the Baptist would have been born right at the time of Passover. Why is that important? Because it says the angel Gabriel came to Mary when Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant. So we know Jesus was born 6 months after the time of John the Baptist, which, lo and behold, is the Feast of Tabernacles. And there's so much in the story of the Feast of Tabernacles. I mean, logically, people know that Jesus began his ministry at 30 years old. How long was his ministry? 3.5 years. When did he die? Passover. So we know when he was 30 years old, his birth happens to be 6 months, 3.5 years before Passover. There's 6 months earlier than Passover must have been when he was born. Which is why it has these incredible comments that the Word became flesh and dwelt or tabernacled amongst us. Literally, that's what the word means. It's why Jesus said to Andrew and John, foxes have holes, birds of the air have no nest, but the Son of Man hath nowhere to lay his head. It's also interesting that during the Transfiguration, the story of the Transfiguration, Peter turned around and said, Lord, we would make 3 tabernacles or booths for you to dwell in. And a voice thundered from heaven and said, this is my son, hear him. Which I find really interesting, because another time the voice thundered from heaven was when Jesus was baptized, and the Spirit descended on him in the form of a dove, and a voice came from heaven and said, this is my son, in whom I am well pleased. Quoting Psalm 2, this is the Son, this day have I begotten you. This day. It was his birthday when he was baptized, and the Spirit of God descended upon him. It was probably his birthday during the Feast of Tabernacles. So there's lots on Jesus being born on the Feast of Tabernacles. So there's a reason to be pretty happy. So coming back to this one, and just thinking about some of the other things that are significant in the Feast of Tabernacles. It said in Ezra that they offered the prescribed number of sacrifices. Anyone seen the sacrifices of the Feast of Tabernacles? They had to offer a specific number for 7 days. And there's one particular sacrifice which is really interesting that changes every day. Anyone know what that is?
I think it was a bull, and they started out with 14 and ended up with 7. Is that right?
Yep. So they start with 13. 13. So in the story of Numbers chapter 29, verses 12 to 39, it gives you the list. And I'm not going to put them all up, but this is the cycle. So what it goes is on the beginning of the feast, they have 13 bulls. The second day is 12. The third day is 11. The fourth day is 10. The fifth day is 9. The sixth day is 8. The seventh day is 7. And then they had an extra day on the Feast of Tabernacles, and they offered one on the last day, which is a lot of bulls, but it's certainly not 22,000 that Solomon offered, because there was a specific number of bulls. When you add them all up, there were 70 bulls that were offered in total, until it got down to just one on the last day. But 70 bulls were offered in total. And most people know that Genesis 10 talks about the nations being divided up into 70, and that of Jacob's descendants, there were 70 of Jacob's descendants that went down into Egypt. And the Jews believe the 70 represent the Gentiles. And they believe part of the offering of the bullocks during the Feast of Tabernacles was an offering for the Gentiles. It was an offering seeking the Gentile involvement in their nation. They knew that they were to be a light to the world and to the Gentiles, which is why in Zechariah chapter 14, it talks about the Feast of Tabernacles and the nations going up. Maybe we should read it, because that's an intimate connection to this story of the bullocks. Zechariah chapter 14. Verse 16 to 20. 2 verses 16 to 18 for someone, and 16 and 17, and then 18 and 19. Where are we up to?
Starting at 16.
Yeah.
And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations in Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain.
Yeah, verse 18 and 19.
If the Egyptian people do not go up and take part, they will have no rain. The Lord will bring on them the plague he inflicts on the nations that do not go up to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. This will be the punishment of Egypt, and the punishment of all the nations that do not go up to celebrate the Festival of Tabernacles.
So isn't that an amazing record of how the Gentile nations, are specifically connected to the celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles? Now the Jews know this, and they believe this prophecy in Zechariah, and part of their offerings of the bullocks is to offer for the nations around about them. that they might have peace with the nations round about them, and that they might teach the nations around about them, because they acknowledge that even though God is the God of the Jews, that he was the God of Adam and Eve. So he is the God of humanity, and it's their job as Jews to educate the world into who Hashem is, who God is, and to tell them about God. And so in the celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles, they acknowledge that the bullocks were an offering for the nations. And I find this incredible, because this is the first time you get the concept of what Jesus said, pray for your enemies. The Jews were taught this by God on this principle of the Feast of Tabernacles, to pray for their enemies, to offer sacrifices for their enemies around about them, because they know if they teach them who God is, they won't be their enemies anymore. They invite them in to the Feast of Tabernacles to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. One of the most incredible things, I think, with that feast. And the feast always comes about or is celebrated after these great conflicts. So after God rescues Israel out of Egypt, they celebrate this feast. With the dedication of Solomon, when he had peace from David's kingdom, of all the enemies round about, they dedicate the temple and celebrate the feast. In Ezra's day, all the enemies round about, they celebrate the feast, and they invited the other nations. Forgot to mention that. If you go to Ezra, he actually invited the nations to be a part of that feast. Amazing. But always at the end of conflicts. And then there's Jesus' connection to it in John chapter 7. John chapter 7, absolutely full of references or the lessons behind the Feast of Tabernacles of God dwelling with them. Because maybe we'll go to John chapter 7, have a look at probably the key quote in all of this section. Comes at the last day of the feast. So verse 37 to 39. What are we up to?
On the last and greatest day of the feast, Jesus stood and said in a loud voice, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, streams of living water will flow from within him.
So this was like just an amazing thing. Right at the last day of the feast, this was called the Rosh Hashanah, the Great Salvation. Was the 7th day of the feasts. And what they do was they'd have what they called the water pouring ceremony. It's called the water libation. And the priest would go down to the pool of Siloam, and all the people would follow the priest as they would bring the water up to the brazen altar and pour the water out over the brazen altar. And the people would sing psalms, Hallel psalms. But on the 7th day, they would go down and they would march down and they would march around the altar 7 times. And there was incredible joy in the whole city. In fact, it's in the Jewish Jerusalem Talmud that says, if you have never experienced the water libation ceremony, you have never experienced joy. So this is according to some of the Jewish sages there. It's just an amazing time of sheer happiness and joy. But it was also right at that time, at the hottest time of the year, at the end of summer, that peak, and it's hot. Everybody's watching all this water being taken up and poured out and poured out and poured out. You can imagine all the people going, pretty thirsty. And then Jesus stands up in the midst and says, is anyone thirsty? Is anyone thirsty? Come to me. Out of his belly will flow forth living waters. So as I said, the connection between water and the Feast of Tabernacles, that's why it says in Zechariah 14, they don't keep the feast, they don't get rain. Because everyone's waiting at the beginning of the 7th month for what's known as the former rains to come. They're waiting for that rain. It's the end of the drought, it's the end of the dry season, and they're all waiting for that rain. And if you don't come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, you don't get rain. There's nothing for you. But if you come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, you'll have rain. Incredible promise of this amazing outpouring of God's blessing. That's why they wave the lulav, by the way, because the plants that grow up by waving it, they're asking for rain from God in the waving of the lulav. So amazing, amazing little connection. I was going to quickly just talk about Paul and Silas. Great example of joy in the midst of tough times. Probably know the story pretty well of Paul and Silas. All went horribly pear-shaped for them, didn't it? So they went out there preaching, and here was this woman, this crazy woman, and she's shouting out, making her people money, and she's saying, "These are servants of the Most High God. They show us the way of salvation." Da da da, and she's making a lot of money for these people that are using her as a form of entertainment. Paul and Silas come along and they heal this woman of her madness, which is great for her. So her day gets really good. She's very happy. Yay, I'm so happy, joyous time, over the moon. These guys are not happy. They've gone from being happy to being very grumpy now because now they're not making any money. So the solution to this is to say that she's now worthless. So now they drag Paul and Silas before the authorities. They make accusations to them and say these things they're speaking things against Roman law. All the people rise up against them, and Paul and Silas, of course, all of a sudden get it real hard. They get beaten by Romans. They get thrown in jail by these Romans. Put in a dungeon, rat-infested dungeon. After being beaten, they get put in manacles, shackled in dungeon. So how are they feeling? Happy! Isn't this just this is the essence of what joy is. Paul and Silas show you this story of that joy is outside experiences. It's very much in the moment thing. And so what God does, has a great earthquake, opens the prison, and all of a sudden this guy, he's now not happy. He's not happy, he's not joyous at all, he's terrified, and he's so much not happy, he's going to kill himself. End it all. And then all of a sudden from prison, stop, don't do that. Don't kill yourself. And so he runs into prison, discovers Paul and Silas in there, prays for them, and guess what? That night became the most joyous night in this guy's life because him and his entire family were baptized that night. Which is an interesting question, isn't it? That he got baptized in one night along with his whole family. But just an incredible experience of joy. I was hoping Darren would come so we could actually blow this in terms of joy. And I was hoping he'd come so he could unpack the word joy in Hebrew. Because I'm not good with unpacking ancient Hebrew, but I'm going to try to do this as Darren would do it. Darren's online, he might see this. The word joy is made up of chidid, made up of 4 Hebrew words. The first Hebrew word is the word. Have I got the right order? Yeah. Well, let's just put them up in what I thought it was, because I think I've got it wrong. It has the word for behold. We know what that word is. remember Darren does this with the little man going up into heaven. So this is the word hey. You remember hey? And it's the man going, hey, look, behold, something big, something great is going to happen. And then he's got this one, which is vav, which is an iron nail, literally means an iron nail. So the man's behold, an iron nail, and then it's got Dalek, which is seen as actually in ancient Hebrew. Sorry, that's not it. The ancient Hebrew, it's seen or drawn as a door to open something, a door into a house. So behold, a nail, the door or the opening, and the last one is the word check, which is seen as a wall or a partition. So I'm just going to say that I think behind this word joy, which is the key to the story of the Feast of Tabernacles, you've got this idea of behold, the nail to open the door to the wall or partition that divides. And it's the story of Ephesians chapter 2. He has broken down the middle wall of his partition because he has been made flesh for us, and he is crucified to unite us as one. So this whole story behind this word joy in ancient Hebrew has this incredible story of the work of the Lord Jesus Christ in bringing about a time when there's neither Jew nor Greek, and this whole celebration of the Festival of Tabernacles is pretty awesome in that regard. I have one last video to share with you. I'm hoping this is going to work, and it's going to connect onto my computer. This is a few days ago, and I think this is pretty amazing in terms of a story of... Let's just start playing and see if it's going to work or if I have to change. No, I'm going to have to change it. Give me 2 seconds so you can hear this. Let me just go into here. Go back into here. And go back into there. So this is a few days ago at just after Rosh Hashanah.
לפני שכמה מילים שלי, אני רוצה לתת לכם במה לרב, תגיד כמה מילים, תגיד תפילה, זה הקרב, ואז אני אסתכל ואגיד כמה דברים שחשובים לי, לזוג היקר הזה. חיילים ומפקדים יקרים, אנחנו נמצאים בסופה של שנה שהתחילה לנו בשבר גדול לעם ישראל והמשיכה לתרועת המלחמה. אנחנו נמצאים היום לקראת מלחמה שאין צודקת ממנה, מלחמה שעתידה להביא שלום וביטחון למדינת ישראל לדורות הבאים. תכף אנחנו נתקע בשופר, תקיעה, שברים תרועה ותקיעה. התקיעה הראשונה זה רמז לעולם הקדמון, לעולם השלם. השברים והתרועה זה קולות השבר וקולות המלחמה. ואחריהם, כשאנחנו ניגשים למלחמה, אנחנו ניגשים מתוך תודעה שאנחנו הולכים לתקיעה הגדולה, לתקיעה שאחריה נוכל לשבת בבטחה ובשלום במדינת ישראל, בארץ ישראל. אני אומר עכשיו את התפילה, אחרי התפילה יהיה תקיעת שופר וברכת כהנים. הכהנים יבואו לפה, כל אחד ישים את היד על חברו ונברך את כל הגדוד. הכהנים יברכו אותנו, שנצא לשלום, נעמוד במשימתנו,
נחזור הביתה בריאים ושלמים ושמחים בחיק משפחותינו במהרה בימינו אמן. אדוני צבאות אלוהי ישראל יושב הקרובים, אתה ציוויתנו בתורתך לאמור, שמע ישראל, אתם קרבים היום למלחמה על אויביכם, אל ירח לבבכם, אל תראו ואל תחפזו ואל תארצו מפניהם, כי אדוני אלוהיכם ההולך עמכם להילחם לכם עם אויביכם להושיע אתכם. ועתה, הנה אויביך יהמיון משנאיך נשאו ראש, על עמך יערימו סוד והתייעצו את צפוניך, אמרו לכו ונכחידני גוי ולא יזכר שם ישראל עוד. היה עיניים חיילי צבא הגנה לישראל, שלוחי עמך קרבים היום למלחמה על אויביהם, חזקנו ואמצנו, ריבה את יריבינו, וחם את לוחמינו, החזק מגן בצנעה, וקומה עזרת לנו ופתנו למען חסדך. אלוהי, שיתנו כגלגל, כקש לפני רוח, כאש תבער יער וכלהבה תלהט הרים, כן תדפם בצעריך ובסופתך תבהלם. מלא פניהם קלון, תבקשו שמך אדוני, יבושו ויבהלו עד היד ויחפרו ויאבדו. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. שמע ישראל, אדוני אחד. הוא האלוהים, אדוני הוא האלוהים. אדוני מלך, אדוני מלך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. אדוני מלך, אדוני מלך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. אדוני יושיענה, אדוני יושיענה. ושב תשועות אדם, ואלוהים נעשה חי, והוא יבוס צרינו.
Pretty amazing, eh? That gave me goosebumps when I saw it, to think that, and a whole battalion would actually stop and acknowledge God and all of that. So Jesus said, my joy I leave with you. So he's coming back, and it'll be like this. It's like seeing somebody that you have missed and have wanted. And that, I think, is an expression of true joy. So, final quote before we get Lionel to close with prayer. If someone can read John chapter 16, verse 22.
So with you, now is your time of grief, but I will see you again, and you will rejoice, and no one will take away your joy.
O Yahweh, thou mighty true God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, yea, and the God of us as well, our Father, we thank you for the calling that thou hast called us to. And may that joy that we long for and have spoken about tonight be manifested with the return of thy Son. We watch and see the time and the age that we're abiding in at this time, and we're waiting for that day to come when our Master shall be here. We long for that day of Zion's glad morning, and therefore we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, that the time to favour Zion will be seen here. Have mercy upon all of us bowed before thee this night, we beseech thee, our God, that we might not only find a place to be part of that magnificent kingdom and beyond, but we might also rejoice in being part of the marriage supper of the Lamb. As we go forth as the bride of Christ into that wonderful kingdom age and beyond at the end of all the work that is to be done in that age. It is with great anticipation that we seek thee at this time, asking for thy mercy to be upon us and praying for our guidance in our daily life. Hear our prayer in heaven, accept of our thanks for all daily blessings given and for the mercy of fellowship and friendship we have in thy ecclesias. We ask that thou hear our prayer then, grant us our petition, we pray thee, that we all may soon be with our Master. And we ask this prayer before thee through thy Son, our Lord and our Redeemer, even the Lord Jesus the Christ. Amen.
John.
While Ron's doing that, a really cool verse that we talked about before was Isaiah 12. It's only got 6 verses in it, but I'll just read verse 2. Indeed, God is my salvation. I will trust him and not be afraid. The Lord himself is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. You will joyfully draw water from the springs of salvation. And on that day you will say, give thanks to the Lord, proclaim his name, make his works known among the peoples, declare that his name is exalted. Sing to the Lord, for he has done glorious things. Let this be known throughout all the earth. Cry out and sing, citizens of Zion, for the Holy One of Israel is among you in his greatness. Yeah.
So did you say that's Isaiah 12? Yeah. So that's what they would shout on the last day.
Yeah, I guess that was.
So on that water pouring ceremony, that's what they would, as they poured it out, which I find really interesting because it's at the end of the Emmanuel prophecies. So this is God with us, Emmanuel, and the whole chapter 7 to 12 is all about God's prophecy of Jesus. And they're in John chapter 7 saying, where did he come from? Who is he? Who's his parents? Where's he from? And then, that connection is pretty cool.
It seems to be saying that we can come to the wells of salvation and we come together. And sometimes it makes, we make a real effort to do that, don't we? I mean, it's not easy sometimes to come together, but the thing is that the benefit of it is you come to the well of salvation. And, so that's why we really need to make the effort.
And the other thing too, which you did mention, Ron, is that these Tabernacles started 3 hours ago.
Yes, I knew it was pretty close. I thought it was, pretty much today. Isn't that cool?
As far as your thoughts on Solomon and his multitude of sacrifices, I actually wonder whether he did actually offer the actual amount that was supposed to be offered, but the offering of the thousands of oxen, the thousands of sheep were peace offerings. So what he did, I think, was he just provided this massive barbecue for all the people that were in Jerusalem at the time.
Yeah.
And because the peace offering was an offering that was offered to God, but it was shared. Everyone got to eat of it. So,
or it could be in payment for 7 years' work. So they just completed it. He had made them work for 7 years. He employed like thousands and thousands of people in the building of the Lord's house. So
but it was definitely more of a barbecue than a big offering.
Yeah, yeah. But it's an interesting thing in terms of when David wanted to build God a house, and God said, "Why do you want to build me a house? I don't need to dwell in a house. I've never dwelt in a house. I don't need walls of cedar." So he allowed it to happen through Solomon, but the whole point of the tabernacle, that's why the booths I think are there, is that God doesn't he dwells in our hearts, he dwells in us. Yeah. So much in it. There's just so much in the Feast of Tabernacles.
Thanks, Ron.
It's a lot. I was listening to this guy that was talking about Ecclesiastes. That's the whole thing with the temporary nature of our life, is what Colath's saying in Ecclesiastes. The word vanity means short breath. Short breath. Literally in the Hebrew, it means short breath. So there's nothing. And like his dilemma in Ecclesiastes is that what's the point? What's the point in accumulating all this wealth or achieving all these things when man has such a short breath? And even in terms of a legacy, you leave it to your kids, but what are they going to do with it? Or you get sick, and how are you going to enjoy it? So he goes through all of this, but the amazing thing is, he says, this Jewish guy says, and I haven't really checked it out, that the word joy appears more in Ecclesiastes than nearly anywhere. So it's like this depressing thing, but the essence of it is actually in this life. It's actually this idea of joy in the moment. That's the value. Yeah. Yeah, and accepting his presence is, yeah. Yeah, I have to have a look and see where. No. Yeah, no, I was hoping Darren was going to be here because I was just going to throw it at him and see if he could unpack it. Oh, and did I put it in there? No, I didn't. Oh, yeah. Oh, by the way, I just thought I'd share with you one of the things I managed to get off my dad's computer or out of his Bible. In his Bible was a story on Nehemiah chapter 8 on joy in the Feast of Tabernacles. So, what's that? Yeah, sure. Oh, really? Yeah. Good. And it's so. I probably should have mentioned that. It's so the opposite to what you would think to say. You would think to say the strength of the Lord is your joy, because God's power becomes your joy. But it's no God. It's the joy of God. It becomes your strength. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it's like God's joyous and blessing people, and it's like if they're sad, it's like you're making God miserable. you know, Somebody's happy, and it's like you're making me sad. Yeah. There's a lot in there. Oh, yeah. Oh, you're Yom Kippur. Oh, yeah, so they're doing 5 days ago, yeah. Well, because they got attacked in 1973 on Yom Kippur, so they'd be on edge. Because I think it was no, oh, not against Iran, no. And they had another lot of drone strikes from. I think that was kind of yeah. So it'll be interesting the Feast of Tabernacles because I think the actual even though it's over a year, because it was October 7 last year when they attacked, but that was the Feast of Tabernacles last year. So, yeah, yeah. So it is the same time.
It's usually she's on the board of trustees for the schools. Used to be, and the Israel's there, but now it's
Uh, yeah.
work pulling all that together. Thank
What's
you.
that?
It's so much work pulling all that together.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
It's good though. You need to.
It's just so exciting.
Oh, so so that one in Nehemiah is a different word.
The joy.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. So that one in Nehemiah is really interesting.
Okay. Are there many for that word?
No. No, see, I grabbed it and thought that was the Hebrew word for joy, but it's the word that's used there. Let me see.
Is it not? Isn't it? Is it
See,
kadah?
that one that I said, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not common. The one for joy is everywhere, but that one in Nehemiah, where am I? I'll go back a bit. Esther, Nehemiah. Kidva. Kidva.
Thank you.
Yep. Kidva. There's the only other actual occurrence is it only appears one other time. All the gods of the people are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Glory and honor are in his presence. Strength and gladness are his place. So it is. That's interesting. That's the same word. So it's his joy.
Yeah.
That's the point. It's not. Your joy. It's God's joy.
What was it? 8 verse 1? What is it? Nehemiah 1 again?
Nehemiah 8 verse 10.
Oh yeah, it is 10.
So that's the only two times.
Yeah, occurrence is 2. Yeah, Cheddar, but it's still Cheddar.
Yeah, no, but that's what.
Yeah,
but
I
got it wrong because I was actually looking at the wrong.
Wow.
I just assumed it was the same word. But
yeah, First Chronicles, gladness are in his place. Yeah. Strength and gladness are in his place.
So I need to find out the other word for joy, which will be that word. So what's that made up of? That's made up of mem, hit, and what's that one? Mem, hit. That's the ancient Hebrew.
What is this that you're on?
This is the ancient Hebrew. So
what is this?
It's an ancient Hebrew
dictionary.
Dictionary,
Okay.
and
Wow.
it's pretty cool because that's got the ones with.
Yeah.
So I started to learn them. I can't remember what this one is. So it's hey, hit, mem, and what's that one? work out what that one is. Looks like an aerial.
Yeah, it does.
Let me just see if I can find it on my desktop. One looks like the aerial, ancient Hebrew, so early it would be. That one.
Yeah.
Shema. Shema. Is that someone saying something?
Ah,
Oh, that must be Darren. Is that you, Darren? Are you Pakarangarin? Reveal yourself.
Yeah, that's me. I'm here.
We're just saying I grabbed the wrong word, but that's the
Sorry, I
one in
missed it.
Nehemiah. Yeah, that's the one in Nehemiah 8, verse 10.
So
So,
which one are you looking for?
so the actual word that's the most common word for joy has, it looks like it's got, the Hebrew word in the Strong's is 8057, and it's made up by the look of it of mem, chet, and it's got the one that looks like an aerial, which is it? It's that one.
8057, I'll look it up if I can.
Summit. What was summit? What's summit? Yes. Summit.
Stomach?
Summit. What does that represent? That little symbol
Is it
of summit.
like a stomach? Hang on. Give me a minute. Stomach. Doesn't ring a bell.
I'll see if I can copy what I got from. I just I didn't realise that one in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 10 only
Yeah.
appears in one other place, and it's used of God's joy. So it's not talking about our joy, which is what Nehemiah 8's saying. For the joy of the Lord is your strength. The other quote is 1 Chronicles 16, verse 27, and it says, "Glory and honor are in his presence, strength and joy are in his place," or his place. So it's talking about his joy
Is
and
that God's
strength
again?
in his place or in his house. Yeah, that's
Ah, there it
interesting.
is again.
That's cool. Hi, Neil.
Nehemiah 8 verses what is the one?
Nehemiah 8, verse 10, and 1 Chronicles 16, verse 27. That's the other connecting one for the word joy. But that's not the common word for joy. But that's the one that
Right.
I was talking about. Really interesting that joy. That one has the whole, like it's got the nail, it's got hay, it's got valve, it's got dalet, and it's got chet in it. It's quite an amazing word.
Yep. Yeah.
So
There we go.
I
So
was thinking behind this is like behold the nail that opens the door through the wall, or because there's a wall which is the partition either between God and men, but opens the door to God, or opens the door between the Gentiles, but maybe it opens the door to his house. So behold, the nail
yeah.
goes through the wall, which is Jesus. We have boldness to enter the throne of grace through Christ because of the nail. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's all there. It's all there. It's all really good.
Which would be the essence of the joy that's in the Feast of Tabernacles, because God dwells with us now. That's what it's about. So cool. Anyway,
It's
that
very,
was
yeah,
my
it's very
thinking.
appropriate.
I'll leave you to unpack it more.
Yeah, I'll have a play with it. It's really interesting, being just only found 2 times.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting word. There's another rejoicing connected to it, very similar, but that only appears 3 times as well. So just not a common word at all. And Varna said, Neil, that you used that verse at Louis' baptism.
That's
right.
Like,
Yes.
yes, he did. And Kimberly did me a bit of artwork with that verse.
Yeah. So that's great.
So good.
Yeah.
I've just been
No.
sitting in for your class tonight,
Oh,
and
nice.
shortly we'll go online for a funeral service for a brother, Brother Provis. Trying to think of his first name, Richard Provis, who's been a
All
long time Christadelphian with great input, and so from joy to sadness.
right. Yeah.
But
Uh,
it's not sadness, is it?
no, not really.
No.
Yeah, I noticed Jemima was on again. So she's come in from Myanmar again. Isn't that incredible? She's amazing.
So that's not our Jemima.
No, that's
Ah,
Jemima. That's Jemima from Myanmar.
oh, right.
Yeah, how amazing. All right, I'm going to go and have some supper. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Thanks,
I
Ron.
was
All right.
at the meeting last night where they were looking at in Adelaide running the show that
Oh, yes.
you people have just concluded, and
Yeah. Oh, good.
they,
Good.
they're thinking of running it next June.
Oh,
And
nice. Well, I
I
mean, if
said,
you
I
if you
don't
get
know.
stuck,
I don't think you'll be there.
yeah. But if you get stuck for presenters, it's easy to present from anywhere in the world, you know.
Of course.
So, so I enjoyed it. It didn't take too much time, and having done it now, if they do it, I'd help out to present.
Yes. We tried to get that across last night that you don't have to find everyone in Adelaide, but we really want you to.
Yeah, and people are worried about the commitment level, like 6 or 8 weeks or whatever. But it's actually pretty easy to do online, because you think like tonight, I'm down here half an hour early. I got to drive down. I got to drive home. Preparation for this is a lot harder than just jumping on for 45 minutes with a pre-prepared thing where you've got
Yes,
another presenter and just talk. It's actually pretty easy. It's fun. So nowhere near the work of doing a Bible class.
Mm. Well,
Yeah.
we had an exhortation here last Sunday that really stirred my feelings, and it was about the brother was very analytical. He went through all the speeches in the book of Acts where the gospel was preached, and he gave a list in order of the occurrences of the various doctrines. And um, it was so well put together. But the key that I got from it was the thing that was most declared by the apostles was Jesus Christ is the Son of God.
Yeah.
That is the declaration. Now, in a Jewish context, that possibly means more, but from our point of view, both Jew and Gentile need to know that Jesus is the Son of God. He's not Jesus. of Nazareth, and he's not Jesus of the Jews. And the whole business of status for Jesus is that he is the Son of God, and the Father has taken delight in him in passing his responsibility to his Son. Now, you think about it, if you're running a business in very practical terms and you have an upcoming son that's doing a very good job, you're happy to pass it over to him.
Yeah. No,
And
good analogy.
it is. And the second most commonly thing was that he was raised from the dead.
Yeah.
So there's the essence of the gospel, first century.
Yeah.
And that really rang bells with me. And then you went down to other doctrines, but that they featured over and over again.
Yeah. No, thanks. I better go and say goodbye to people here.
Yes,
But nice
good.
catching up.
Yes,
All right.
yes,
God bless.
good.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll
Yeah.
end the meeting.